All right, this is UAP Channel. Now, we're returning to South Africa, and the reason is we're going to talk about giants, and I'm going to show you some of the best pictures from the previous set of photos that I didn't have time to show before. Happen to be some of the best photos of the bunch, and the reason I didn't include them before is they require some more analysis. So here is one where it actually shows construction. And what's interesting about it, I'll talk about in a bit. Look at these camps. There's a comment I got about this photo you see on the bottom that I did show these before, these two. On the bottom, if you look, the young man on the bottom right walking along looks like he's dressed for the 1950s, and the men in the wagon look like they're more of old world style. But these photos are from the very early 1900s, these in particular. I'm guessing maybe it's mistakenly around the 1930s, but I don't think they used ox carts in the 30s. I think they would have switched to motorized vehicles mostly by then. So it's curious. But in this next photo, I mentioned it briefly, but it bears more attention. This map does not look like a map made by these people. They're hanging it outside of a building, and even with a ladder, a long ladder, if you climb to the top of that long ladder, it's really not a usable map. Not for people of this stature. But when you look at the doorways, you look at the windows, certainly it looks like the map would be usable by somebody of such a stature, although it would be big for them as well. That's what makes it so remarkable. Now, this construction photo is very interesting because it may be one of the oldest photos I've ever seen and you've ever seen. And the reason I say that is you can see an old photo coming up here in a second of the same structure many, many years later, and that photo is from the late 1800s. And you'll see it's completed, it's weathered, it's a little bit worn down, and it's got trees grown up all around it. Maybe the trees are fast growers, but I think maybe we have a photo here of the original construction of one of these buildings finally. It's something that, as researchers, we've been looking for a long time. Now, I want to add, I would have thought that this was a reassembly or reconstruction of an older building that got broken down, or perhaps they decided to move it for some reason. But the stones, I guess the stones on the bottom don't look very fresh. But for the most part, the stones look pretty fresh. The cranes are there. They're not broken down. They're not just topping it off. They're actually building the blocks up. They have rails going to it, which makes sense as far as transporting materials. It kind of checks out. And I see two people in the photo. One or two of them actually in the foreground, and a couple in the background are teeny tiny folks. There's one gentleman to the right, leaning one arm on the scaffolding, who is a giant. It's clear. I mean, I see it. I hope you see it. There's no doubt. That man is a giant. He's in the background compared to this other full-grown man standing on top of the blocks. The steps are made for the giant man. The steps are probably about exactly right size that you'll see in a little bit for that giant man with the one arm on the pole. And then there's another giant guy. It's harder to tell, but he's up on top on the right. And then to his right, closer to where the block is going up, is a much smaller man. Maybe you can't really see the difference, but he is much taller. But definitely the one on the bottom right, giant, for sure. Absolutely for sure. So here are some wee folks, some smaller men climbing these fences. Is this the invasion? What are we seeing here? What are these fences for? Are these to keep lions out? Maybe they just built them that big to keep, rhinoceroses and lions. I don't know. I don't know how it works in South Africa. I really don't. But I know that some of you do. So maybe you can enlighten me on that. I thought this was neat, just with the cows by the beach. Just neat. Unusual, but neat nonetheless. Now, here is one of the more interesting parts. So this is that same structure I just showed. Look at the age of the trees grown up around it and behind it that were not there before. And in particular, I want you to look now at the steps, because it seems to be an afterthought. They carved in the steps for 1/2 height, which is like our size, so that people of our stature could go up and down the steps. It may be that the giants and the regular sized people live side by side. Or it may be that the regular sized people cut the steps later. But I think based on the photo we saw of when this was built, it was at the time when there were giants living side by side in peace and harmony with the regular sized people. It could be that the giants were simply genetic anomalies, throwbacks of an earlier time that diminished down to almost nothing with hybridization over time. Seems plausible, seems reasonable to me. Now this photo with the cannons, looks odd to me, and I don't know if it jumps out at you. But what jumps out at me very plainly and clearly is this. The cannons are up on a ridge over the city, and they are pointed at the city. How does that make sense? What kind of terror is being unleashed to the citizens? It doesn't look right to me at all. It would make much more sense if the cannons were pointing out to sea, but there's something going on there. There's more to the story. Now, it could be, I don't know, could be from World War I or something like that. Here's a photo of a building, again, large steps, large doorways. It looks like it's one story that's 30, 40 feet high, which is excessive. There is a area at the top, like signage, but I don't see any letters. It looks like it's been defaced. It looks like there was a clock or an image in a circle. And it looks old. Look at the patina. I don't know if those are lichens or mold or just patina, but it's aged very much so, which doesn't really jive with the history that we are told. And there's a zoom in on the girls hanging out on the steps. Again, here's another building. Looks aged to me. Also, the walls are very high. The windows are very large. It looks like they had problems of crime at the end of the original civilization or the latest civilization. Things look a little cattywampus, a little tilted, a little bit leaning, not square, perhaps because of age. It's hard to tell in these photos if the people being photographed are regular sized people. I do see very small steps off to the side. This may be an orphanage and they had the smaller steps for the children. Here is a photo of large buildings, and I just want to point out the palm or palmetto tree. Technically they're a grass, but it's very large, so it's been around a while. So this photo may be extremely old, and the person in the background is very large, unless that's a child in front of them. But there are people further back from that would have to be adults. Look how skinny his neck is, the giant looking person. He has kind of squat legs and a long neck. The roadways seem to be kind of muddy. Sometimes things are somewhat buried. The print on the buildings bespeaks a civilization that's been around. The colonies were supposed to be originally Dutch, but I think it was the Dutch East India Company. I don't know for sure, but it's just like New York was originally New Amsterdam. It was supposed to be Dutch. Harlem, for example, is named after, it's not an English town, so it's originally like that, but it's been co-opted or overtaken by the English before then becoming independent. It's the same story in a lot of places. The pole going up in the middle probably isn't a flagpole. And I have the arrows here to show you the size of the people and the size of the steps. And you get a closer look at the steps, and they're worn down. I think they're worn down from age. That's how much they were used. A lot. A lot. And it seems like they just go right down into the mud. And it looks like a little bit of scrubbing going on to hide some of the things on the walls. But those steps are not right sized for these people. And the railings are too large. Railings only need to be a little bit higher than the hip height of the 95th percentile height person. You see these poles, they go up and extend out of the frame of the picture. They're not flag poles. They weren't that crazy about flags. Something else I noticed, a lot of the signage bespeaks a group or a civilization that is getting ready to vacate. There are all kinds of like clearance warehouses, discounts, auctioneers, auction houses, clearing houses, travel and transport, warehouse storage, and those types of things. If people were moving in and settling the area, they wouldn't bring a lot of stuff with them. That you wouldn't be trading personal sundries, or well, sundries maybe, but not the types of goods that you would auction. And then there was a lot of real estate sale signage as well. So if people are building things, they wouldn't be selling them right away. Not as much as if it was being vacated because some people saw the writing on the wall before others. So that is a possibility there. And there are many photos showing just large groups of people arriving. Now, it could be like a market day or something like that, but the way they're dressed nicely, dressed to the nines, almost in a cult-like fashion, like a parochial school or something, posing for a photo. They're arriving. They're just trying to make the best impression, and they're following some set of instructions that was given to them. By whom? We don't know. Not yet. The first people to enter into the town, it's pretty much empty. It's all there. And there are giants left over, standing there right in these pictures, right in plain sight. People don't notice them, but this here Again, he's got his back to the camera. This time there's a giant leaning kind of against a pole or just walking by the light pole. When you look at him, you look at the doorways, you look at the windows, he fits. You look at the grown men. Maybe they're children, but they don't look like children. They're not proportioned that way. And they have a cart, and it's like a sales cart, some kind of sample cart or something like that. And they're about as tall as up just past his elbow, not to his shoulder in height. He's a big dude. Or they are extremely diminutive, but we know from the other photos, they're regular sized people. Look in the background, you see more regular sized people. That man in the foreground, slight foreground, not extreme foreground. It's not a perspective issue. He's a giant. Here they show up, they come with some oxen, a wagon, and they don't even know where to go or what to do exactly. At first, they just congregate into the town square and sit down in the dirt, stand around and look around, and they're getting pictures taken of them. Meanwhile, in the background, there are these huge buildings, huge doors, huge windows, sometimes no rooftop on the building, sometimes no windows. And if you can see in the windows, if they're not boarded up or covered up, you can see right through because it's well lit inside and there may be no wall on the back and there's no roof. And it's just completely empty. In other photos, you can see they're emptying the buildings out. Whatever was left over from the previous civilization inside the buildings is hauled out and brought out and sorted through by these tiny people who have now taken over. And again, it's old signage. This is not a new construction building. This is not a newly painted sign of a new business or a recently made business by the settlers, the pioneers, the colonists. No, this is the kind of thing you would see in Detroit now, except it would be if you took Detroit, emptied it out completely of every living person, and then had people the size of Peter Dinklage or Vern Troyer coming in from a cult, all dressed the same, arriving with no technology to speak of, just gathering and congregating around and just kind of sorting through the stuff they find. This is exactly what it would look like. Here they are on the beach. They're not dressed for the beach. They just have their Sunday's best on, whatever uniform they're given, and they're checking out the water as if they've never seen such thing before. Maybe they're from underground. I don't know. I'm speculating, of course. But the buildings in the background look like grand structures for larger people, the kind you would find in Atlantic City or something like that, except they're much better constructed and larger. And again, the verbiage, the wording you see, it's notable to say it's in English, hence the English taking over everything. It wasn't because the English, this little island, could wield such power and influence to just take over the world. It was because the previous civilization had already decided to speak the very language I'm speaking now. And the reason I'm speaking it isn't because it's not because I'm English, although some of my ancestors are, but I should be speaking German based on my own personal ancestry for the most part. So a lot of people, and then even today, you go to Germany itself and you can pretty much read things in English and see people, it's switching to English slowly. I mean, not anytime soon, but pretty much almost every single German can speak English. I mean, if you go back 20 years, 30, well, maybe more, 30 or 40 years, you have Eastern Germany where very few people spoke English. But look at it today. If you go to Eastern Germany, almost every single person knows a lot of English. And they speak more and more English in schools there, and it's just changing. Here is the White House, a White House. Found it interesting that it would be named that. Was this the capital of some regional nation? Do things just repeat over and over again? I have been talking about going on Twitch. I'm getting ready. I just don't know if my equipment is adequate at the moment, and I'm debating whether or not I wait to have better equipment, or if I just kind of do a dirty stream. Not dirty, yeah, but just a rough, rough kind of initial starting off, which I'll probably end up doing, because I have a lot of I do a lot of analysis before I buy equipment, and I also like to have a lot of scratch before I buy it, and I really don't have a lot of scratch to spend on a new laptop, so that's that. But it's neither here nor there. We are talking about South Africa, and there's a lot more to say about these photos. I'm only constrained by time. I don't want to withhold them from you. I've given you the analysis of most of them. I think some of the things look strange, like these huge ships that may be larger than they need to be. And then they're kind of buried in the sand. The way these banners are kind of put up, like the way things are named. They have ye olde ladder lean. The old time ladder lean. really you don't see much of anything being constructed. You have photos of buildings getting rooftops. You have rubble, you have old antiquated things being torn about. You have piles of stuff laying around. And then there's one Madame Obama, the African giantess, the tallest lady in South Africa. The streetcars. You know the song by U2 where the streets have no name? Is that a reset city? They remove the names of the street? Their names on the streetcars. It looks oversized, like everything. Like this exhibition or whatever they're doing here with this, the architecture is just beyond the pale. The blocks in this water reservoir are huge. How do they do that? And the men are there with pickaxes. It's like they're there with these hand tools, like a shovel and a pickaxe, and they're going to move these 1-ton blocks around. I like to see it. Oh, one other thing, these boats, they're like canoes, but they are huge. They're the biggest canoes I've ever seen. They're just like canoes. They're just way larger. Maybe that's a normal thing. And then here's a crane in the town square, not really doing anything, it looks like. But it's just there like the founders bring it out on Founders Day. And they show all the cult recruits, brainwashed children from the dungeons or whatever it is, orphans. Hey, look, see this big old crane? This is what we used to build all this. Well, you guys were waiting to come. See what we did? We are the Freemasons. Support your local lodge. And do as we say, and we will give you a grade on your report to us. Go to work. And then, oh, here's a steam engine. This is a new technology. Wink, wink, smile, laugh, laugh, elbow nudge, elbow nudge. We use steam power to build this city. You can believe that in the history museums, they show you the truth. You'll go there on a class trip, every last one of you. And we built these buildings this big because we care. And we love flags. We have all these poles sticking up because we want to wave the flag proudly. Whatever nation's in charge of us at the moment, we're going to wave that flag with pride. Pride's a sin, but you should be filled with pride for your nation, because nationalism isn't a sin, it's a virtue. Don't ask any questions. Just follow the textbook. No, don't follow the textbook. That's not what I say. I'm UAP. You're watching the UAP channel, and I'm out. Have a good one. Catch ya next time.